This is Will Tchakirides interviewing John Garland for the HBCU Radio Preservation Project. It is 11:19 a.m. on April 5th, 2025. This interview is being recorded at Mr. Garland's home in Washington, D.C. We are nearby Howard University. All right, welcome, Mr. Garland. Appreciate you taking the time. Going to have you start here. Just can you please state your full name and what your relationship is or was to WCSU?
My name is John W. Garland, and my relationship to WCSU is that I was a student listening to the radio station and subsequently became the university president and listened to, but more importantly, supported the radio station.
Yeah, thank you. Now it's a full life interview. We're going to take it back a little bit to start. Can you tell me a little bit about, first tell me when and where you were born.
I was born in October 24, 1944 in New York City, New York at Flower Fifth Avenue Hospital. Grew up on the east side of East Harlem on First Avenue between 101st and 104th Street in some early New York experimented with projects, with project living.
How would you describe that place? What would I hear? What would I feel? What would I see?
You would hear and feel and see a very mixed community. When we were there, I would say it was mostly Italian. It was a mixture of Italian, African American, with a lot of Hispanics moving in. But it was a mixed community.
Can you tell me a little bit about the people who raised you, where they're from, what they did for work?
My mother raised me, and my mother raised me. She was from Charleston, South Carolina, James Island. My father was from Lynchburg, Virginia. My mother and father separated and divorced when I was about 6, and my contact with him was very minimal after that. I have four sisters, 4 big sisters. They participated in raising me. People often say, "Oh, you have 4 sisters? Are you a baby?" No, I like to tell them I was Cinderella, if you know what I mean. But nonetheless, I had four big sisters who helped raise me, and I also had uncles and aunts who watched over me. Come from a huge family. So there were always cousins or relatives close by that I could turn to, that my mother could turn to for assistance. One of her aunts, who was close to her in age, would often come from Charleston and spend time with us, months with us, helping my mom, helping us out, helping raise me. From the earliest memories I have, and I'm talking about infant. Every summer I would go and I would spend my summers on James Island with one of her sisters. She had 2 sisters, Lily Mae Chisholm and Orly Brown. They lived on James Island. They lived, I'm going to say, a quarter mile at the most, half mile apart on Grimble Road. If you go to Grimble Road, it was essentially it was on what was then called, used to be the Grimble Plantation, and which is where I now have my house on Grimble Road, and I would say it's one of the historic, in my view, roads. Grimble Road dead ends at one end into Folly Beach Road, which goes down to the beach. The other side of Folly Beach Road, where it is Fort Johnson Road. Fort Johnson Road goes about another 4 miles or so into Fort Johnson, where the first shots of the Civil War were fired. We often think of Charleston as being the place where the first shots were fired. Yeah, that's true. But at that point, cannons couldn't reach from Fort Johnson, from Charleston to Fort Sumter. It was fired from Fort Johnson, which is about a half a mile or so from Fort Sumter.
Can you tell me a little bit? You were sharing some of your family history with me and your lineage in that land and in that place. You know, when you think back and reflect on your family's story and the Civil War era and how far you may have come, like how do you think about it? What is the legacy of that heritage?
The legacy, I think, is a close-knit family that's very proud, that watches over and takes care of its own and its community. My recollections of my summers going to Charleston as I got older, the first week or so I would fight everybody because they wanted to fight the boy from New York, of course. After that, we would just run, play football, baseball, hunt, do this. It was just fun. It was just an opportunity to sort of explore yourself and others and family. Learned a lot of values. My aunt's husbands, my uncles, were, I think, some of the best role models I had growing up. My uncle Douglas Chisholm, he worked in the shipyard. He would work the shipyard, come home, and farm. He was a hard worker. He was a deacon in the church. He was somebody to be admired. And everybody on that island, particularly in Grimble Road, admired him and what he did, what he accomplished in life. And he raised a large family, all of whom were quite successful. Same thing with my Uncle McKeeva, my Aunt Orly Brown's husband. Same thing. Worked a day, come home, farm, raised a wonderful family, very successful family. They were role models for me in the value of hard work, the value of being humble, and the value of not sort of being stern, but caring. I learned a lot and learned my core values from them.
That explains a lot, given the career trajectory we're going to discuss today. And your mother's name?
My mother, Amy.
And how did she fill her time? What did she love to do?
She worked hard. She was a hard worker. She, as I said, she had 5 children. We, 4 girls, me, and she was a hard worker. She was a taskmaster, and she was always made sure that we were well fed, we were well dressed, and that we had a sense of history. And then we got that sense of history by her sending us down to Charleston to understand what it was like to grow up and be around the history of James Island.
And then what did it mean to have that transfer of culture from South Carolina to New York? What did you bring with you to both places, and how did it shape who you became? Well,
I had a lot of aunts and uncles who would rotate between Charleston and New York. Growing up, I knew 2 places. I knew New York. I knew Charleston. I knew there was New Jersey and other places, but they were kind of like waypoints getting through. I knew D.C. because D.C. was one of the places, one of the waypoints. It was on the green book, so to speak. When the times I would drive down, we would sprint from New York to D.C. We would stay with somebody here, freshen up, do what we had to do, and then we would sprint down to Charleston.
Can you just say a little bit? You mentioned the Green Book, the significance of that, and what it meant for travel.
Well, I was so young at the time. I didn't have a clear understanding, but I knew when we traveled by car, we had places that we knew we were able to stop and use the restroom, get food. It wasn't like today where you can drive and pull off and just. No, we had very definite places we would stop and spend time with.
Moving from Jim Crow North to Jim Crow South.
That's right.
Now, tell me a little bit about coming up in Harlem, education, school, where did you attend? And what were some of your favorite things to study as a young person?
I went to elementary school, which was literally across the street from the projects on First Avenue and 104th Street. Forgot the number. This is PS 68. I'm not quite sure. PS 168. Not quite sure. But it was right across the street. I'd walk out to First Avenue. My mother would take me to First Avenue, walk me across the street. Then I would run up the block. I did some history reading, and interesting. New York decided when it was building its schools to put them in the middle of the block.
Yeah, what's special about that?
They could have them in the middle of the block, and it was more secure. Yeah. Because then you wouldn't have children and traffic that would interfere with and create a danger for students. But if the student got across the street and they walked up, they were in this secure area. And they were literally H's. They would have the school, and then they'd have an H in the middle where you could go between buildings. But for me, my recollection, it was a great place to go to school. I do recall this. I had a speech impediment growing up. Either I was talking too fast, something was going on. And this one teacher just sort of pulled me aside and said, look, we're going to work on this. And she spent almost a year, getting me in the classroom and sitting me down one-on-one and really helping me out. It was that kind of a place where teachers felt they identified a student and said, I'm going to help the student, and they worked with you. It was, as I said, multicultural. I have an old photograph of my kindergarten class, and you could see it was blacks, whites, a lot of Italians, Hispanics. It was an interesting and good place to grow up.
How about your friendship groups and who you hung out with? Would it be as mixed, or was that more just pertaining to the school?
Neighbors. It was typically neighbors. The building was multicultural, they would say now, but I hang out with my neighbors. I do recall a Mr. I've got his last name now, Butler, Mr. Butler. He was the fisherman. And we were on the East River, so we would walk. He would go fishing, and I would go with him. And we'd walk from the building to the East River, and he would catch eels.
Interesting. Yeah. Did he teach you how to fish? Or did you know coming back?
I tend to learn by watching.
Yeah. That's interesting. What else have you learned by watching?
I learned hard work, how to treat people. Most of what I learned by watching, and less by watching, observing, picking out what are good things to do, what are good things not to do, how people react, how folks treat one another.
And those value judgments come from your family, come from
the family, and some from after I left my family and went in the Marine Corps. I learned, how to treat people. I learned how I didn't like being treated, and how I wanted people to treat me. So I picked up that old adage, do as to one as you would want them to do unto you. So,
did the church play a role in your life growing up?
Somewhat, somewhat. And I should say that we did go to church, particularly when I was in Charleston. Every Sunday, Uncle Doug or Uncle Kiva would come in and, you shine those shoes, boy, get ready, let's go, So it did play a role, mostly the music. The music was very uplifting.
Can you say more about the music you heard?
Wow, this wonderful singing, choruses, how it would sort of raise in crescendo in the church. It was just,
Since we're talking about music, was the radio on in the house growing up?
Yeah.
What would your mother or family members listen to?
My sister was Dinah Washington. Why am I having a senior moment?
It's okay.
The gospel singer, woman, big voice. My mother took me down to the Apollo Theater a couple of times. Yeah, she would take me down to the Apollo Theater, and I would watch some of the performers.
Can you describe what it felt like to be in the Apollo?
I mean, it was just I'm like a little guy sitting there with everybody's, like watching these acts come on, and it was interesting. It was interesting, and it was I got to see how much larger the world was than my little block and my floor on the third floor in the projects. Yeah.
And what did you like to listen to as a young person?
I listened to what everybody else listened to, Symphony Sid. And by the time I got to be around 13, 14, I got into jazz. Really did. And we were listening to Sonny Stitt and Rollins. Miles. It was a group of us, and that's all we did. We really, but I was introduced to John Coltrane in 10th grade.
And were you able to see some of this music live?
Pardon me?
Were you able to see any of this music live?
I never did see him. 10th grade. One of my, we had music appreciation courses back then. They had that in the public schools. And
you could bring in a record and play it for the class.
Exactly right. And one of my classmates brought in a record and said, my dad has got this and he likes it. He really loves it. So, and it was my favorite things.
Now, listen, Harlem, coming up in the post-war period that you are, what's it like politically? And what I mean is the politics of the community. What are you seeing and hearing in relation to the issues of the day?
Growing up, it's interesting. Not much. I mean, we were, in some respects, insulated from the issues of the day. We were more focused on learning, on staying out of trouble, the value, necessity to work hard, and to be good citizens. I don't recall, other than the power of the music, jazz in particular, I don't recall us really spending a lot of time, except when I was in Charleston, dealing with those issues. In Charleston, they were clear.
Do you remember any, soapbox preachers or folks out on the street who were speaking to political issues or anything like that?
I really don't.
Okay.
I really don't.
No worries. Okay, now you mentioned the military, the Marines specifically. Did you choose to enter the Marines? And tell me a little bit about what happened there, that decision.
I wasn't a very good student. I didn't, quote unquote, graduate from junior high school to high school. I was unfocused, unserious. In order for me to graduate from junior high school to high school, I was given an ultimatum: either you pass this test or you get left back. And the one thing I must say I had is I'm good at high stakes tests.
You work well under pressure.
Yeah, took the test, passed, went to high school. Was unfocused, transferred from one high school to another, transferred into Jamaica High. Jamaica High is in Jamaica,
In Queens? Or?
Yeah, in Queens, yeah. And that's by the time we had moved to Queens. And I was unfocused, sort of just like going with the wind, staying out of trouble, but I was just not a very serious student. And by the time I turned 16, 17, I decided that I probably needed to leave the house, and with the assistance of my mother, I got joined the Marine Corps. Since I was 17, she had assigned for me to join. So you take the test, it's an armed forces qualification test. And apparently I did well enough for them to say, okay, well, we'll accept you. So I joined the Marines. And
what was your feeling about that? What was your thought process in it? Just take me through a little bit of that internally.
Something happened at some point. It could have been around the end of the Korean War. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I always wanted to, I just said to myself, I want to join the Marine Corps. I want to be a Marine.
Did you see something? Did you hear about an event, a movie?
Could have been. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it was something that sort of piqued my interest. So by the time I got to be 17, I said, this is it. I can do it. I could become a Marine. So I signed up.
What was that basic training like?
It was, thinking back, I was a boy training with men. A 17-year-old training with 20, 22, 23-year-olds, even 19. It's amazing the strength difference that a male body goes through as they mature and get older. I realize that now. At the time, I was wondering how they were able to do all these things, and I was sort of like having to work twice as hard. My body just hadn't matured yet. But I did work through it, was successful, and got through boot camp. It taught me discipline. In the Marine Corps at the time, I don't know if they still do it, they taught you everything. They used to have the drill instructor used to take you outside, have everybody lined up, pick up your little toothbrush. This is how you brush your teeth. Literally, they would go through that because there were people coming in who didn't have that kind of training. This is how you wash your underwear. This is how you make a bed. They taught you very fundamental stuff about what it was to be an independent human being. This is how you fold your shirts. This is how you polish your shoes. Very basic stuff. They teach you that because you're going to be part of a group of people who have to be able to be self-sufficient.
And what does it feel like to be a part of that collective?
You became to rely on one another, trust one another, because you were always preparing to be in a situation where you had to rely and trust your colleague, your sort of person in arms with you. So I learned quite a bit. I learned how I liked to be treated, how I did not like to be treated, therefore how I would treat somebody else. But I learned a lot and traveled quite a bit. I was deployed about 5 times.
Yeah, I know you've been party to some significant global events.
Yeah.
Walk me through some of that.
I turned 18 on a troop ship circling Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
About 1962?
1962, yeah. October 1962, I was part of the troop ships or a naval blockade of Cuba.
And as a young Marine Corps member, are you thinking about the geopolitics of the moment, or are you just I'm here to do my job and serve?
That's it. I had to do my job and serve. I recall exactly what happened. We used to try to go home at least twice a month from Camp Lejeune. I was at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And typically what you do, you'd go to the parking lot. There would be places, going to Philly, going to New York, going here, going there, and you would stand around and they said, I'm going to New York. And you would, find somebody, give them $5, jump in the car, and you drive to New York on Friday when you had Liberty about 4 o'clock. You had to be in by Beverly, which is 5 or 6 o'clock on Monday morning. Coming back, we came back, particularly Monday morning, Sunday morning, about 3 o'clock in the morning. All the lights are on base. I said, oh, man, this is interesting. All the lights are on base. And get into my barracks. Sergeant runs up, all right, Garland, you prepare a field marching pack your gear, blah, 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 blah. That was because that's when the crisis. That's when the President Kennedy had ordered all the Marines and everybody to be on ready. So I recall that. That was on a Sunday. On Wednesday, we were on ships.
Okay, so how did you feel?
How did I feel? Getting ready to do my duty. I was young. I was 17.
No nerves?
I don't recall having any nerves. I just recall I had to, this is what I got to do.
Fair enough. Okay, and then you actually get down to the Caribbean. You're off the shores of Cuba. What's happening next?
Just sailing. We sailed around. We stopped at Mayport, Florida, Naval Base. Had Liberty call, got back on ship, and so we spent most of 80% of the time, 90% of the time on ship, just sailing around.
Was it relieving to hear when that situation got diffused?
What people, as a member of the military, all you're focused on is doing your job. At the time that I just turned 18, I was apolitical, although subsequently I became more political because of things that were happening in the U.S. But when we finished, we got back on base and resumed our lives. And literally within the next 6 months, I was on what was called a med cruise.
Tell me about that.
We call it med cruise, but it's an expeditionary force that the U.S. always has at least a regiment of Marines deployed in the Mediterranean. So that's a 6-month deployment. I saw some of the most beautiful sights. I mean, sailing. We sailed. I was on an LST, landing ship tank, because I was in 106s. 106s is a recoilless rifle that is used at the company level. It's the most powerful weapon at a company level at the time. And so they had us on a LST, which the bottom is fairly flat. So if you can imagine crossing the North Atlantic in a storm on a boat that's got a flat bottom, it was rough. I mean, you're hitting the waves during the storm. It was rough. Good thing is I never got seasick. So,
how did your family feel about you joining the Marines?
Well, obviously, my mother signed for me to go in. I had tried to convince 2 of my cousins to go with me. They said, "Sure, we will, John," until I signed up, and they said, "See you, John." Well, my one cousin, he did join the Army a year or 2 later. But at that point, I mean, I'm in, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. But it was an interesting 6-month cruise. We stormed a lot of beaches, literally. I mean, in the sense training. We would put on troop ships and we would storm. We stormed the beach in Sardinia and spent 3 days in Sardinia, just sort of walking around. Storm the beach in Crete. You know what I mean? And you've seen them climbing these rope ladders down into these little landing craft and then taking off. This is training.
Give me a sense of what race relations were like within the Marine Corps at that point in history. What was that about?
A lot of the officers are from the South, as were a lot of the other enlisted people. For Black Marines, you made rank slowly, if at all. I made rank very slowly. Never had any disciplinary actions, but it just made rank slowly. you could tell the difference between Marines who are from the South and those who are from the North. But I can recall that one of my most staunchest defenders was a Marine. I think he was a corporal. He was NCO. I was a private or maybe PFC, and we were traveling together, and we stopped at a restaurant, and the restaurant, this is in North Carolina, refused to serve me, and he blew a gasket. And he was from the Deep South. He blew a gasket that they would even do something like that. And I do recall another time, and this is when I was these trips back and forth between New York and Camp Lejeune. I do recall a time that I hooked up with a bunch of guys. We were driving from New York Port Authority. That's where you get the car, and we stopped in Delaware to get something to eat. There were about 5 or 6 of us. I think I was the only Black Marine in the group. So we pull up and go to a restaurant. We're going to get something to eat. Come on, let's go. We go into the restaurant. The place becomes dead silent. You look around, you walk in, and about 5 minutes later, Delaware state troopers come in. And they said, "What are you guys doing?" So, trying to get something to eat. What's going on? They thought we were civil rights workers. They said, "We're Marines. We're just getting something to eat." And the troopers, they walked us out and they said, "Look, guys, you don't want trouble. We don't want trouble. They think something else is going on. If the best thing, if I could assist you, is why don't you just move on and go to another place, because it's not going to, they don't want you here." And this is, I'm going to say 63, 64.
So, yeah, I want to hear more about what you're feeling personally in that moment, but I also want to know, this is a time when the civil rights movement is really beginning to heat up. You're talking about sit-ins and, student nonviolent coordinating committees getting going. Like, what, as that is taking place around your service in the Marine Corps, how are you thinking about it?
I wasn't thinking a lot about it, because you remember I was in a very isolated environment. Either I was I spent 18 months on ships, on seas, which is a very isolated environment. I do recall seeing some newspapers of marchers being beaten and abused.
Would that spark any conversation within the Corps?
I couldn't recall any. I can't recall any.
Yeah. And to be denied service or to be stared at or glared at, what, help us understand, like,
you gotta remember, feels like. I'm two things. I'm from New York.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in an environment and at a place where, there was, discrimination and racism, and I had kids call me names. But I'm feeling like I'm just part of the society. I'm not feeling in any way that I have to sort of suppress who I am. And I think that's the virtue of growing up in the place where I grew up. I did not feel a need to have this sense of duality. I act this way here and that way there. I always felt I could be who I was and who I wanted to be. So when this happened, I was kind of like, these people are crazy. It's not me. These people are crazy.
Thank you.
But I do remember going downtown Charleston with my, on Sunday, we would go get ice cream. And have you been to Charleston?
Not yet.
No, okay. It's now, I think, a Forever 21 or some store, but it was a 5 and 10. And I do remember when we went to get ice cream, we had to go to the side door to get ice cream. We couldn't go into the front. I do remember that. And when I go to Charleston, I walk past the place, I chuckle. And I show my wife. She says, "This is the 15th time you showed me this."
So you keep mentioning it. It's significant. It sticks out. Something.
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm. What is it like to come back to a place and feel that difference?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Marine Corps, right? And I know you do deploy to Vietnam. Is that correct?
Yes.
To the degree that you're able and willing, can you tell me a little bit about your experience in I believe you led a squad there as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it like?
Well, you talk about being nervous. My first night in Vietnam, I spent on a cot, scared to death. Then I got assigned to a platoon or a company, and from then on, I was part of a unit. We ran patrols, day patrols, night patrols. They would either be patrols. They would call the larger efforts would be called search and destroy missions. I do recall a couple of times being out, particularly at night, on patrols in open areas, just feeling like, what the hell am I doing here? It was like this sense of complete alienation. So, what am I doing here? This place is completely foreign. I recall seeing how our machinery would just tear up these beautifully manicured rice paddy dikes. How tanks would just go through the dikes and I was kind of like, this is terrible. We're just tearing up the work these people have done over so long. It was tough. It was tough on trying to, in one sense, empathize with the people, and in another sense, when you see a dead Marine, you're kind of like, wait a second, that could be me. You see somebody laying down in a green uniform dead, you say, that could very easily be me. So it's the overwhelming sense of that I had was, I am here to do a job. I'm here to go home and make sure that my fellow Marines go home. Did we know what we were doing was wrong? All we knew was that we had an assignment, and the assignment was to get back home, to get home, to survive.
Did you know anything about Vietnam before heading out there as a country?
They sat us down as I flew to Vietnam. We flew from, they had me go to California, Camp Pendleton. Took a plane out of LAX or wherever it was to eventually flew into Okinawa, where we would be acclimated. I think we were at Okinawa about a week or two. We were at Okinawa for a couple of reasons. One, to get all the shots, that you needed to sight in your rifle. They gave you a weapon. The idea was you sight in your rifle, so you know how it works, and you get it sighted in the right way. And they sat us down. They talked about why we're going. We're part of CETO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and we've agreed that we're going to defend this and defend that. They would propaganda. They'll tell us why we were there, and you would sit there and you would, and then
job.
They put on a plane and fly into Da Nang. I happened to join up with the unit that originally landed, the first unit, Marine Corps unit that landed in August of '65, 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines. They were the first Marine Corps unit large contingent unit in Vietnam. They had lost a number of people in a major operation, and I was one of the replacements.
Hmm. And you saw combat, and there was an incident, right? To the degree that you can, what do you remember about? I believe it was a landmine. There was injury.
We were it was called Operation Georgia. That was the name of the operation. We were trying to push the Viet Minh further north, and there were reports of North Vietnamese in this mining town that was close to the border. So they put us on helicopters to go to this mining village. It was still in Da Nang province. A couple of things I remember. I was on a helicopter, and there was a reporter from, I'm not sure, CBS something, a reporter who was sitting there with us. What are you guys doing? How do you feel? Where are you from? That kind of stuff. But I recall jumping out of the helicopter, and you ever hear rain on a tin roof? Mm-hmm. That's what it sounded like. There was so much gunfire. It was just sort of like, it was like, and so we landed and we formed up, and we spent the next 3 days, with incoming. I almost got hit by a sniper a couple of times, that kind of stuff going on. The incident that resulted in my being wounded, and I was among the lucky ones in that whole incident. They believe it was a command detonated mine. What had happened was, some months previous to that, the U.S. had stored and given the ARVN, which was the Army of Vietnam, the South Vietnamese Army, a number of weapons, including mines. And they were attacked. And when they were attacked, ARVN, very often was just sort of like, I'm out of here. And they left. And the Viet Minh or Viet Cong would pick up the weapons, the mines. That operation was the first time we made contact with North Vietnamese regulars. And they were very well trained. They were trained like we were. So you would hear bugles blowing and folks, moving around. They were very well trained. Mm-hmm. One thing that sticks out during that operation was we were moving as a company, maybe 2 platoons. We were moving in an area, and then we approached an area where apparently there had been some captures, where the Marines another company or so had captured a number of North Vietnamese, and they were holding them in areas, in an area. And it was another company, and they were coming, we were walking in, and a couple of these troops were furious. They said, those are the people that attacked us and killed so-and-so. And I saw, 2 or 3 of these guys run towards the captives. And I saw this young lieutenant jump into the hole where these guys were coming, and tell these people very forcefully, you will not, these are our prisoners. And he was very clear what you will not do. You will not attack them. You will not abuse them. And you will get back with your outfit. And that was, it was the kind of thing that said, okay, this man is well trained and has a good sense of right and wrong in the midst of all this. And it stuck with me.
Hmm.
It stuck with me. It's the kind of thing that sticks with you when you see something like that.
Yeah.
When he put his unarmed and with armed men coming at him.
It's so weird. I don't know the right way to ask this, but what do you remember about coming back home and what it felt like?
Let me tell you about the incident.
Yeah.
You know, I had my platoon, and there were, I'm going to say there was about 2 or 3 platoons. We were all lined up, and we were eating meals, and around this large tree, and we were about to. We got an order from the sergeant or somebody. Okay, break it up. Let's get to your fighting holes, because it was getting dark, and typically your fighting holes are being dug around areas. And as we were getting up, a mine was set off. It was command detonated. Somebody, out of my platoon, my platoon was about 3 killed, 4 wounded, including myself. It was, and I was lucky. But coming home, I think I had a different experience coming home.
What was different about it?
Well, I had spent 2.5 or so months in the hospital. I had leg wounds. I got some wound in my arm. The one that was the most tricky one was the eye. I got shrapnel in my eye. And I must commend Navy doctors. They were just outstanding. And my sister, one of my sisters, and her husband, who had been a Marine, encouraged me, don't get out until they give you make sure they rate you to see if you have a disability. So when I got back to the U.S. and I was at Marine Corps Air Station El Toro, which has been subsequently closed, but at El Toro I said, well, I'm putting in for disability rating. And after the El Toro at the time was just a separation place. You go in, spend a couple of weeks, you get separated, and you go home. Well, because I was, I had put in for disability rating. After 2 weeks, they said, "Well, Garland, we don't know what to do with you." I said, "I don't know either." So, well, I'll tell you what, you need to make sure you come back here every 2 weeks. Pick up your paycheck and find out where you are on the rating. So I literally I met some guys, and we rented an apartment in Los Angeles. And that's when I had, I will say, the most profound radio experience.
Oh, tell me about that.
There was a radio station, maybe 1 or 2 radio stations, and they would play music, but they would always be preceded by either the reading of a poem or some statement. I mean, it was remarkable. We would just sit around just waiting for, after the music was playing, for the announcer to come back on or the programmer to come back on, and just, I mean, it was, I stayed there, I spent about almost 6 months there, 5 months or so, listening and appreciating how powerful that station was.
And what was the format like at the station?
It was R&B. It was R&B station.
Would you consider it black radio?
Yeah, it was black radio essentially. It was black radio, but they always had poetry, essays. I don't know what they were reading. Whether these guys were making this up on the spur of the moment, but it was just, it was beautiful.
Which may be just a good time to just ask you, what does black radio mean to you? I mean, this is something we come across often with HBCU radio stations. They'll mix in poetry. They'll mix in a reading of the newspaper and the news of the day. They'll mix in, literature and storytelling with the music. So, it sounds like this sparked an interest for you. What does black radio mean to you?
It means that. It means it's more than it. Music is one thing, but it's also it's meant to uplift, educate, to provide you a source of strength, a place to get, like a barbershop, get your dose of culture. You know what I mean? So that's what it means to me. I mean, and whenever we travel, I'll try to find a local HBCU radio station because that's exactly what you get.
Well, since you said you find them when you travel, besides, WCSU, which we're going to get to a little bit, what are some of your favorite HBCU radio stations?
Elizabeth City State University, North Carolina Central, I've not heard the South Carolina State radio station. Do they have one?
Yes, they do.
I've not heard very much of them, but ECSU.
Elizabeth City.
Yeah. North Carolina Central radio station. Obviously, WCSU, because I listened to that for many, many years. I'm trying to think. Yeah, those three, I would say.
Okay, well, you mentioned WCSU. Tell me how you eventually from Los Angeles get to this place of deciding to go to college and attend Central State.
Well, I got back home in around Christmas '66, and got a job as a result of with the assistance of a friend I grew up with. I went to elementary school with.
What was that job?
It was at Fashion Institute of Technology. I was mailroom clerk. And I remembered that I sat down with the HR director, remember her name, distinctly remember her name. And she said, John, I want to give you this job, but you need a high school diploma. And I said, oh, Miss Richmond, I have one. And you do? I said, yes. I got a high school diploma in the Marine Corps. I took the United States Armed Force. They had this test, the GED test. And I took it, and I had passed it. And I said, here it is. She said, oh, John, that's wonderful. But to work for us, New York State requires that you have a New York State GED. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to give you this job, but you have to get this New York State GED within 3 months. Otherwise, I think they'll fire me if you don't, have a New York State GED. So I said, okay. So she gave me the job. I went back to my old high school. They had night GED. I took the GED, passed it. So I have 2 GEDs. And that was my job. I worked the mailroom. Essentially, what I did was we would sort the mail, and then we would get little carts and baskets, and we would walk around the school dropping off mail to various departments. And as I would do that, I would meet a lot of the faculty. Here's your mail. Here's your mail. And they all, after a while, they said, hey, man, you're on the ball. You ever think about going to college? And at that point, this is the first time in my life I'm in one stable place. I'm not flying, I'm not going here or sailing there. And I'm having, a couple of stable girlfriends. I'm saying, I don't need to go to college. I'm doing great. So, okay. But I did get promoted. I went from the mailroom to the, what we call it, the equipment room. Then I got a job with the department. I was working with this wonderful woman who was in fabric design, and she had me work with her to help students. I would cut fabric and roll down big balls of fabric and cut it up, and for students who were making design projects. And none of the faculty there said the same thing. John, you ought to go to college. I did try night school at but it was just too. It was too much. I mean, working full time, going to night school, and then traveling back out. I had an apartment by the time in Queens. It just didn't work.
Where were you trying to do night school at?
I think I was at
CUNY or
Manhattan, Borough Manhattan, or maybe Brooklyn. I'm not quite sure where it was. But I think I enrolled. It didn't last a semester, and I just said I gave it up. And it was around the spring of 1968 that I had an epiphany. One of my friends who I grew up with in Queens, he had graduated from Central State. This is in 60. He graduated in 67. And he was going to art school and getting a graduate degree in New York. And we would hang out together. We were like, cut buddies. We did some really interesting things together. And he would say, "Man, you ought to go to school." And I said, "Yeah, I think I'm ready to do something. I'm ready to get out of New York." One reason why I was ready to get out of New York is because that was during the time I began to work with the Black Panthers.
Oh, please tell me a little bit about that.
I was essentially doing community work. They had, in Queens, they had the center where they would try to feed children. And I was sort of working with them. I didn't consider myself a Panther, but I was just sort of trying to do community work. I had become a little more conscious by that time. And I noticed that on my phone, I would hear clicks and things on my phone. And everybody said, "Yeah, that's the police. They're sort of monitoring your phone." COINTELPRO was like big time. This is what, 67, 68? So I said, well, maybe I should just get out of New York and try to go to college. And I applied to school. I wanted to go to school in California. But all the California schools said, no, you got to go to community college first. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And then I did apply to Central State. And
So essentially you heard about it from your buddy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do want to linger just for a moment. So thinking about, you're working with the survival programs that the Black Panther parties initiated around free lunch programs and what have you. You came from a theater of war in Vietnam, and here you are in New York, essentially helping to support an indigenous community and an indigenous proletariat in New York. Poor and working black folk in the city. And you're becoming more politically conscious.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
How do you square it?
What I tell you what did it for me. What really sort of turned the light bulb on. I recall at the time I was living with my mother and my stepfather. And the Detroit riots were going on. And I'm sitting there watching TV. And they have the National Guard or whomever, or the troops pull up. And you could see the children looking at the apartment building. And when I saw this tank fire a 50 caliber machine gun into those buildings, it jolted me. It was kind of like, because I know what a 50 caliber round can do. It will take your arm clean off. If it hits you in your arm, you've lost that arm. I'm kind of like, they're firing 50 caliber machine guns at children in the United. It just sort of jolted me awake.
The war was brought home.
Yeah, yeah. No, the war, well, whatever, it was brought home.
Warfare was brought home.
Yeah, when I saw that, it was kind of like, wait a second, what are we doing?
Yeah. Scholars call that the imperial boomerang.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the thing that kind of like, and my family says I was out of control for weeks.
Did you feel angry? What did it make you feel when you saw that happening?
I couldn't. It was angry. I was discombobulated. I was kind of like, having survived it, I just couldn't imagine how we would use those kinds of weapons in our communities.
So what year is it when you actually do enroll at Central State?
I enrolled in fall 1968.
Okay, so significant unrest had happened in the country, 67 and 68, right? Dr. King gets assassinated in April of 68. There are
That's right. Mm-hmm.
rebellions taking place all over the country, New York included.
Yeah. John Coltrane had died. Ooh. And I still remember the day I heard him, the day he died.
Oh, tell me a little bit what you felt in that moment.
I was driving. I had a little Volkswagen Beetle, and I was driving in New York, Manhattan. And I was listening to trains. Oh, they got a lot of trains today on the radio. Ooh. And then the announcer said, "Yeah, he died this today." I had to pull over and stop and get out the car, and I could literally see people walking down the street weeping. I mean, maybe it was just me, but I was kind of like, it was, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild when those kinds of deaths happen and you remember exactly what was
I remember
going
exactly
on.
what happened, where I was and what I did. But, I had the distinction, I always say this, of being, I was an early returning vet. You figure now, I'm back in the United States in 1967. I got my discharge papers in February 1967. So I had the distinction of being a returning vet in the middle of the civil rights and anti-war movement.
I did want to ask you what you made of the anti-war movement when you returned and how it felt to think about it and about your service. What did it mean?
It was kind of like, it was a distinguishing feature in my mind, and the only time I got pushback was early on, right? Early in my first semester or so at Central State. I was a 24-year-old college freshman, first of all.
A little older.
There were, I had worked at Fashion Institute of Technology. So I was wearing sport jackets. I was a little preppy, a little dressed. And so everybody thought I was a narc. They thought, this is the man, he the cops, But that broke down fairly quickly. But then as we looked around, there were a number of other returning vets, guys who had served and who were coming back and going to college. We had a fairly large contingency of returning combat veterans on campus. So there was a lot of support we had among one another.
And culturally, what's the campus community like at that time? What is different about Central State when you get there?
It is shifting, massive shift. My wife will tell you. And Central State was occupied by the National Guard in the fall of 1967.
How come?
You familiar with that?
Tell me about that story.
As part of the civil rights and anti-war movement, there was a group of students who were protesting, so much so that they, I believe, began to occupy some of the administration buildings. The then president, Harry Groves, decided to call the National Guard. The National Guard, I wasn't there. My wife can give you more details, but the National Guard were called to campus and literally fired weapons. As a result of all that, classes were suspended and kids were sent home. Students were sent home in Thanksgiving of 1967. So the Central State had been occupied by the National Guard in 1967. Prior to that, it was a very buttoned-down HBCU. The women had to wear certain dresses. You could only entertain young men in the student lounge. It was very buttoned down.
Kind of respectability was the culture.
All that broke down. Because I recall in the fall of '68 how certain conventions had just sort of completely reversed and changed.
Do you recall any particular protest activity, or what was the Black Power movement present?
Gee whiz, you think about the activists Angela Davis, Stokely Carmichael, Muhammad Ali, Amiri Baraka, Ralph Ellison. They all visited. They were all part of the speaking tour that would come to campus, and visit us. We had convocations weekly, and they would be part of the group. We had faculty members. Many of my professors were World War II vets who got their PhDs and advanced degrees as a result of their military service. And early, the few that got sort of through that GI Bill opportunities. I recall when Muhammad Ali came to campus, it was 1969, 1970. I mean, it was. We had concerts from Delphonics. I mean, it was alive. Being the only HBCU in the Midwest, when we had homecoming, all the black students, it seemed like from all the campuses from Ohio State, OU, University of Cincinnati, would come to our homecoming. We'd have at least 15,000 people on campus during our homecoming weekend. I mean, it was a place to be.
Thank you. Yeah. And, WCSU, the radio station, from what I hear, the first HBCU to get an FCC license in 1962. It goes on the air. Mm-hmm. Are you, as a student, or other students listening to the radio station?
Absolutely. I mean, what else was it? Yeah, we had to. I mean, we had AM radios in our little cars, and we listened to the radio station, and it was a place to get the music and what news we got.
Yeah. What does anything stand out in terms of what you were listening to on the station, or what information you learned and what was communicated to people?
Nothing stands out any more than it was the lifeblood. It was the lifeline to what was going on campus. Between that and the Gold Torch,
is that
Gold
the
Torch newspaper?
I like that metaphor. You said the lifeline. Mm-hmm. Why are HBCU radio stations so important as that lifeline to communities and to students?
The majority of HBCUs are in rural communities. And when I was a student, the community of Xenia was not welcoming to us.
Is that a majority white community?
Yeah. Well, it was. But it was 4.5 miles away, and it was a local community. On the other end was Cedarville. So we were bracketed by, I'm not going to say hostile, by unfriendly communities. They realized that we were economic lifeblood because we had students, people who spent money. But that didn't mean that they were going to treat us very well. In fact, one of the annual things was to march from Wilberforce to Xenia as part of our protest.
Can you say a little bit more about that march and just?
Oh yeah, I mean it started around my understanding, it started around 62 or 63 as part of the civil rights marches. There was an organized campaign that would march into Xenia to desegregate facilities. And that's what we would do. We would do it as students. When I became president, we would march. I would march with the students and the faculty. I think it was on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We would all pack up and brave the cold because it got cold, and we would march the 4 miles from Wilberforce to Xenia.
And something like WCSU radio would help kind of inform the people.
Inform the people.
What's happening.
Make sure everybody knew where and when, and you listen to the music. The time you have little transistor radios or whatever,
Sounds critical, yeah. Now you, as a student, you got a little bit involved in radio.
Yes.
But it wasn't at WCSU, is that correct?
That's correct.
So what got you interested in actually being on the radio?
Well, WYSO radio station, Yellow Springs is home to Antioch College. And Antioch College at the time, and still is, was sort of like a progressive station. I saw Bob Dylan perform out there one time, and I had a number of friends who had apartments in Yellow Springs. It seemed like every Wednesday or something. I'm not quite sure if it was on Wednesday, but the Ohio Players used to perform at Yellow Springs, and they performed on our campus. They were out of Cleveland, but they would come down and perform. Zap is from Dayton. They would perform on our campus and in the Antioch campus. So there was just a lot going on. Several of my friends were also involved in the radio station. And we had a real strong relationship between the Black students at Antioch, and it was a group of us activists who were supportive and worked closely with them. And one thing led to another, and I was listening to YSO, and I was talking to somebody, and they said, "Oh, you want to do a radio program?" I said, "Sure." What would you call it? Music for the Black Liberation Front. And
it's a powerful title.
Yeah. And the next thing I knew, I had a radio program on WYSO.
So tell me what you would play and what you would talk about.
I would play jazz, obviously. And I would talk about what was going on then. But I mostly played music and did more music playing and less talking.
And would it be like a once a week show, an hour long?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, once a week.
And
the other thing, during this time, I was also, I was majoring, my major was political science. I was also studying music.
Kind of minoring in music? Or?
Well, when I finished, I had a minor in music.
Oh, wow.
I was studying alto saxophone. And
so you can play.
I could play. And I was playing with the little groups locally. And
where would you play out?
Campus.
In like Antioch?
Yellow Springs? Antioch, yeah, sure. Antioch, putting little concerts. Yeah.
That's really cool. And I imagine was Coltrane the big influence, or were Sonny Rollins, others?
Coltrane was everybody's influence.
Yeah.
That's why I played alto. I wasn't going to try to play tenor.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that political science was your major. Tell me a little bit about some of the some of the courses you took and what you remember about being a political science major and how it shaped you.
Okay, well, during this time, there were a number of influences on our Yellow Springs campus and the Central State campus. There was a professor out of OU called Robert Rhodes. I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Rhodes. Harold Rogers. These were really some brilliant academicians. And Bob Rhodes took it upon himself and others to come to our campuses and say, we're going to hold study sessions, but to supplement your education, because you're learning, but you're not learning what you need to know. And they started off talking about the kingdoms of Africa, Mansa Musa, and the rich history of Africa. And we studied. We would get books, and we would sit there, and we would have to prepare, and we would do this at least about once a week. He would come down maybe once every 2 weeks, and he somehow moved us from that into scientific socialism and Marxist-Leninism.
So this precedes there being a formal Black Studies department. This is more like
absolutely.
Political education on the.
Oh yeah, this wasn't part of university course. This was something else, and I think it was organized mostly by the folks out of Antioch, and there was a group of us that would enjoyed it.
Yeah, listen. So you're reading Marxist thinkers. You're learning about revolutionary movements, and you're learning about the central place of Africa, right?
Yeah, and learning how to think learning how to think critically.
Yeah, critical theory.
Yeah, that's right. Learning how to think critically.
It's not the first time I've heard this talking to narrators, and the question, I'm trying to think like that supplemental education that you're gaining, and how did you incorporate that into the work that you did, and how did it inspire what you wanted to do as an HBCU grad?
But as I say, it taught me how to think critically, how not to just get information and digest it and say that's what it is. It taught me how to think critically. So by the time I was about to graduate, and I graduated in 3 years from Central State.
Wow.
Time I got there, 24, I realized after the first semester, I didn't think I could make it. Like, I can't do college work. I had been out of school for 6 years and didn't graduate high school, had a GED. I'm like, I'll give it a try. Let me make sure I say this. What was most important, and the reason why I respect it so much, is the VA, Veterans Administration support. When I was discharged from the Marine Corps. I got a disability rating. I had been in the Marine Corps active 5 years of active duty. I was supposed to do 4. I was extended after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution for 4 extra months. I should have been discharged, but I should have been discharged April of 66 and got wounded in May 66. What can you say?
Wow.
So the Marine Corps gave me 10% disability rating and sent me home. And I went to the VA, and the VA, again, because I was an early vet, they looked at me and evaluated me, and they gave me a 30% rating of disability. That 30% was enough for me to be eligible for what was called vocational rehabilitation, voc rehab. And voc rehab says, we will provide you with educational and training assistance for 48 months to prepare you to be a success. So I had 48 months of voc rehab opportunity available to me. When I applied to Central State, I was assigned a counselor. I can't remember the man's name. But he said, John, you got this 48 months. You need to make sure you turn it into something that's useful. Well, I took those 48 months. It got me through 3 years of undergraduate school and a year and a half of law school. And the counselor said, we're going to work this so you can finish up your second year of law school. The third year is going to be on you. So I was able to convert that 48 months into 3 years of 3 years of undergraduate school, graduate in 2 years of law school.
And was law school an immediate thing right after?
Well, law school was. How did law school? Law school happened because of the chair of the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, David Hazel, Dr. Hazel. I'm going to say this must have been around early spring, maybe late winter. He came to me and several of my friends and said, Garland, I want you to come to my office. I said, okay, doctor. He went to his office. Okay. I want you to meet me here tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. I want you to have on a tie and a jacket. We're going to Ohio State. They've asked me to bring my top 3 or 4 top students to the law school. And this must have been, 70. So I said, all right, Dr. Hazel. Showed up, put us in his car, drove us up to Ohio State, met with the dean and other folks at Ohio State. And they said, okay, here, fill this out. I filled out an application to the law school and got it accepted.
And Ohio State, right, major state school, but PWI, what are some of the differences you're noticing about this campus in relation to CSU? And you're in law school, so it's a little different. But
obviously it was huge. I mean, it was huge. A lot of resources. And that's what I noticed. It was the next step. You got to remember, by that time I'm 25, 26, 27. I'm a little older guy, and I'm used to different things. I'm not overwhelmed by everything. I developed a philosophy: keep my head down, walk fast, look busy. Always look busy.
Optics.
Huh?
The optics.
Yeah, that's right.
But you learned how to keep cool and collected in the core,
right.
and
that's right. So I'm always busy. I'm not overwhelmed. And obviously, there were many of my colleagues, many of the people who went to school, who went to law school, were kind of like overwhelmed. They're thinking that I'm, this whole notion of what these professors are thinking about what I'm thinking. I say, I can't have time to think about what, I don't have time to do that. But I went to law school because of Dr. Hazel and because of Bob Rhodes. Because I asked Bob, I said, what should I do? He said, well, John, let me tell you something. You can be out here and you can talk a lot of stuff, but people are going to really listen to you if they think you got credentials. You need credentials. And going to law school or doing something is going to be a good credential. So if that's something you want to do, you go and do it. Just do it well. So
now, coming into law school, how are you thinking you want to use the law in your life?
At the time, I'm thinking, one, this is a challenge. Something happened in my first year, maybe it was the second year, that really kind of like, wait a second. We had a seminar, sort of, and this seminar is something that people, where they invite guests. And one of the guests was, I think, a senator, a U.S. senator. And there were a number of people, obviously students in there, and some of the students were, challenging this guy about the U.S. foreign policy. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening. And this guy had the nerve to say, well, you got to remember, the United States is the most peaceful country. We are peaceful and most, And I said, wait a second, what are you talking about? And I rattled off all my deployments. What are you talking about? We're most peaceful. And everybody looked at me and looked at him, and he was flabbergasted. He was like, you can't tell me that. But at the time, I was more focused on getting through law school, and my focus was passing the bar. Because I said I can't be a lawyer unless I pass the bar. So my focus was graduating, passing the bar. Sort of like one step at a time. I wasn't looking at, I'm going to be they were folks who said, I'm going to be a tax lawyer. I'm going to be this kind of a lawyer. I'm going to be that kind of lawyer. My focus was passing the bar.
Okay, so you passed the bar. And now you met your wife, right? Carolyn?
I met Carolyn at college. We were students. I asked her out on a date, and she turned me down. And the next time we sort of interacted was about 3 or 4 years later when I was in Washington. I was on a program that had me on the federal government scholars program, where I was working doing a summer internship at the Federal Trade Commission.
And was that your first big gig after law school, or?
My first big gig after that was a summer internship, summer of 1973, after my second year. But my first job out of law school was with the Federal Communications Commission.
So another radio connection, or in addition to
Federal Communications Commission, and I was called the Cable TV Bureau or branch, where we worked with cable TV providers and who wanted waivers from certain rules, and my job was to look at the waiver, write an opinion, draft an opinion, and have it go up. I did that for about a year. And it was a bit frustrating because I thought that some of the requests were out of line, but I was told, approve it. We know what they want. So by that time, I was fairly active here in Washington and established a chapter of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. And this was it must have been about 75, 76. And
a real heyday for Black Washington.
Yeah. Yeah.
And go-go music's popping, and things are really.
City, we were jumping, and then I got a job. My first real job with the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Law.
And what kinds of civil rights law would you practice?
I directed a program for which is interesting, and to upgrade discharges for veterans, the Veterans Discharge Upgrade Program. That's what it was called. And the Washington Lawyers Committee worked with law firms who provided services. Although I had my own caseload. But my job was to assist and identify and train lawyers to represent individuals who had less than honorable discharges. I did that for 2 years, and we had a 70% upgrade rate, which goes to show you that the military after Vietnam were just rolling these young people out of the military for a number of insubstantial reasons. So we had it was a very successful program. A number of people upgraded, and to this day, I mean, there are folks I know whose lives have been changed dramatically. Just the idea that you were undesirable and having a discharge that says that, to having one that says you were discharged under honorable conditions, is just, it can be life changing for a person.
Yeah,
and also make you eligible for VA loans and housing, that kind of stuff.
Speaking of housing, where did you end up settling in D.C.? What neighborhood?
Pardon me?
What neighborhood did you end up settling in D.C.?
When Carol and I got together, within the 6 or 9 months together, we bought this house.
Okay. Here in
LaDroit Park.
LaDroit Park. It's a beautiful home. And I also know that in your legal career as now a civil rights attorney, you did some work in North Carolina as well.
I did.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. In the spring of 1979, a number of us at the Lawyers Committee here in Washington were looking at opportunities to expand legal services, particularly in northeastern North Carolina. The northeastern North Carolina is the Black Belt. There are counties in that part of the state that have majority Black populations. In fact, the history has, if you look at it, it is right across the state line from where Nat Turner lived. There were opportunities. I've been talking about legal services, and they said they were looking for some directors. So I applied for the position of a director for what was called then the legal services for the Coastal Plains, and got the position and moved to northeast North Carolina.
And what were some of the conditions that folks were facing? Yeah, it's a mostly agricultural community, right?
It was rural community. They were facing a lot of their legal problems related to courts, a court system that imposed harsh penalties for civil infractions. We couldn't do criminal litigation or criminal representation. Our work was totally based on civil. Black farmers being discriminated against tremendously. I mean, our focus at some point became on the problems of Black farmers. But we also represented individuals in cases involving what we would call violations of civil fair trade law. For example, there were some stores, chains in these communities. You would go in and, I need a mattress. You buy a mattress, you can't afford to pay for it. So they have you sign a credit agreement where the mattress becomes a security for the loan. You go in a couple months later, I need a dresser. That mattress and the dresser now becomes a security agreement. They'll become securitized. I need a refrigerator. So eventually, everything that you own is part of this security agreement. Even though you may have paid for it, it's still part of the security agreement. You miss a payment, and they come in and repossess everything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes.
We have, we repossessing everything. And what we would do, we would go to court and we would say, you can't do that. And we'd have these fights with courts, fights with judges. I had one judge threaten one of my lawyers. I had a judge tell me, I'm tired of all this paperwork coming from legal services. I mean, it was incredible. But we had great success. There was one county in which there had never been an elected Black official. Because of the work we did, they first got their first elected Black official. We did a lot of good, particularly around the issues of farming. The U.S., the Farmers Home Administration is the point of contact in these communities for farmers. in Northeast North Carolina, you needed to have your ducks in a row and your crop ready to go on the ground by early March. Because that's when planting season begins, and that's when you need to be able to get your crop in so you can harvest a healthy crop at harvest season. Put your paperwork in the fall. White farmers would get their paperwork in and approved, and they'd be ready to go. They'd have all their money for seed, for fuel, for whatever they needed to plant. And the black farmers, they would just sit on the applications. And then finally, if you got approved, you'd be approved for less than half of what you really needed. So you didn't have sufficient resources to put in your crop on a timely manner where you'd be successful. So I would sit down with some of these farmers, and you would realize that they were land rich but cash poor. They may be farming 70, 80 acres, no resources, no money. And that was the idea. Starve them out to the point that they would eventually have whatever land that's been encumbered would be taken over by the local banks or whomever.
How did it feel to support these farmers and to be doing this work?
Well, I felt like it was great work. It was great work. As a result of that work, there's a report. It was called "The Decline of Black Farming in America." It was issued by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it prominently featured the work that we did in Northeast North Carolina. And it really laid out the case that the Farmers Home Administration was really was engaging in discriminatory lending practices with respect to black farmers.
Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So moving us forward to your sort of university administrative career, describe to me that transition from working around civil rights case law and how you got involved in these kinds of administrative practices.
Well, I came back to Washington in the spring 1984, and was in private practice, engaged in private practice, working with a small firm, eventually doing some work myself. I was doing mostly civil work, representing civil litigants, as well as some criminal defense work. At one point, I was involved in one of the longest trials in federal court in D.C. We had a 4-month trial involving 9 defendants. It was a RICO prosecution by the U.S. Attorney. Interesting case. Learned a lot. My clients were convicted, but because the judge made an error, the convictions were reversed. And they were subsequently, in exchange for pleas, they were sentenced, time served. They had been in jail about 3 years by that time.
That's sort of a racketeering type
case?
Racketeering,
RICO. Racketeering Influence Couple Organization Act. But in any event, during this time, I was someplace and I saw this advertisement for a general counsel position at UDC.
University District of Columbia.
That's correct. And I looked at it and I said, it was a very simple application. I said, I filled it out, sent it in. I think about 4 months later, I get a call. We got your applications. I wonder if you could come in and we could interview you. I said, sure. I went in, talked to some folks. A couple months later, got another call. Could you come in? The president wants to talk to you. I said, okay, that's interesting. So I went in, met with the president, Raphael Cortada. He was from New York, and we had a great conversation. And he hired me. He said, look, I want a lawyer who's lawyered, and not somebody who's coming here as a result of the mayor wanting patronage. I want a lawyer who's lawyered, and you've done that. So there I got appointed, I got hired as a general counsel for UDC, and had a wonderful time. I was able to work closely with the then Attorney General of DC, Fred Cook, and we did litigation house. It was a great experience. It really was. I enjoyed it.
Do you remember UDC's radio station by chance?
I sure do.
What was the format like there? And
the format was jazz. Edith's last name was the general manager, but she was the general manager, and I argued with great force that the university should not sell that license.
This is something that we focus on as a project, the selling of a radio station's FCC license.
I argued with great force that it was a mistake. But apparently the university was having some financial issues. And we talked about the fact that this would not cure any financial issues. This would be like a cough drop that would melt away and you still had the problem. But it was also an opportunity, a place where you could outreach the community, fundraise. It was worth more than $1 million that C-SPAN was going to pay for it.
Mr. Garland, you're talking about an issue that we've studied closely at Shaw and WSHA. It's a very similar situation. Mm-hmm. So, you are now. You're becoming a university level administrator. You have an understanding of the value of these radio mm-hmm. stations and why they need to be preserved and protected. When is that fight taking place? Do you recall, roughly?
I was there from 88 to 91.
Okay, so in the 90s.
And it was taking place during that time. I'm not sure if the station was sold shortly after I left, But it was maybe right after I left, it was sold.
Does that fight, that struggle to save a station, to preserve a station, or to argue in its favor at the very least, does that inform how you approached your work as when you eventually became president at Central State University?
It did. I mean, to the extent that that it helped me understand the true value of the station, because you got to remember, there were only three stations in at the time in DC. Well, 3 or 4, but you had WOL, you had WHUR, you had Pacifica, WPFW, and
Jazz and Justice,
and WUDC. And I just felt that was a real asset to the university. And that selling it, as I said, is like a cough drop. You put it in, you stop coughing for a while, and it melts, and you didn't cure anything. You just,
And how devastating was that for the community? Did you get a sense from people who listened?
The community was furious. Community wanted it, loved the station. I mean, I forgot Edith's last name. She was the general manager. She was outstanding. It was going well. It was going, but the mayor at the time, I'm not sure if it was Marion Barry or his successor, just felt that it was the money was important to the university.
And they're managing the station. Huh? They're managing the university, the city.
Yeah, that's right. And this went into the black hole, but the university lost an asset.
Yeah, we're gonna continue to try to learn more about WUDC and its legacy, because we don't want to forget these stations. That's part of the value of this project. Yeah. Okay, so I know you do eventually move on from UDC, and you head over to Virginia, right?
My contract. They hired the board. They fired my president. They fired Ralph Cortada, and then they hired his replacement. The board secretary, and they didn't renew my contract, and I don't think I wanted to renew it anyway. I mean, because things were changing so much. I went back into practice. And it happened again. I saw this advertisement for the Associate General Counsel at the University of Virginia. And I said, well, I'm going to apply. And one thing led to another. And sure enough, I had a chance to sit down with John Castine, who was the president of the University of Virginia, as well as the then General Counsel, James Mingle, and they hired me. And sadly, John Castine died about a month ago.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Brilliant, man.
Now, University of Virginia, right, a very different PWI than Ohio State. This is Charlottesville. This is Jefferson's backyard, right? What are you feeling being on that campus at that time?
I was thinking about that earlier today. I walked in, metaphor, I'm a car guy. I walked into a engine that was hitting on all cylinders and that was singing like a Formula One engine. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it felt, I could be wrong, but it felt like every unit at that institution was at the top of its game. And if there's one place that prepared me for the presidency, it was that place.
And what were some of those values or those experiences that prepared you?
The competence. I mean, from the bookstore manager to the executive VP to the deans, I mean, everybody was hitting on all cylinders. To the director of admissions, it was just, you just see people who know what they're doing and are unafraid to do it well. I was the general counsel, Jim Mingle, brilliant. The staff just sort of working as a unit, as a team. The president, John Castine, he was a true mentor. I remember the incident, as a matter of fact. Charlottesville was located in an area where sometimes it gets these freak snowstorms. And we had one. It must have snowed about 12 inches of snow. And, being an old gun-ho guy, I got in my car. We lived in Earlsville, and I literally slid into the office and was walking around looking for coffee. And I said, I'll go down to the president's office and maybe sneak a cup of coffee and run back up. So I snuck down and went to the president's and then poured my coffee, and I heard this, John. And I turned around, it was the president. And I said, oh, you got caught stealing the president's coffee. And he called me in. He said, come on in. I want to talk to you. I said, okay. So I went in, and we started talking. And he said, look, have you ever thought about being something other than a university attorney? And I said to myself, I think I'm doing pretty good. Number 2 lawyer at University of Virginia? I said, oh, sure. No, maybe senior administrator someplace. He said, oh, great. That's what I wanted to hear. I'm going to be doing some reorganization around here, and we'll see how things go. 4 months later, I got his secretary came to the office and said, here, the president wanted me to give you this. Opened up the envelope, and it was an announcement for an executive assistant to the president. So I guess he wants me to apply for this. And I did.
And how long were you executive assistant to the president?
About 3.5 years. Okay. He sat down when I first day in the job. He said, this is what we're going to do. The first year, you're going to follow me around. You're going to prepare my talking points. You're just going to begin to do. You're going to learn what I do and support me. And that's what I did for that first year. I was like a little puppy dog. Wherever he went, I was.
And again, coming around, you know how to be an observer. You know how to listen.
That's right. Mm-hmm. The second year, I'm going to put you, as he said, first year, the second year, we're going to have you begin to look at running certain things at the university. In the second and third year, we're going to have you really begin to run some components at the university. And after that, then next thing is you need to look at opportunities that may be outside the institution. So, okay. And that's what happened. The first year, I shadowed him. I learned, John Castine had 3 English degrees from the University of Virginia. So the man knew how to write. And he taught me the value of brevity. Say what you want to say and then leave it. Move on. You don't need to write, essays. You just need to make the points and to move on. Valuable stuff, particularly in the presidency. Because the more you write, the more people will pick you apart. The second year, the director of EEO retired, and he sent me over to run the office while they did a search. At the end of the search, they said, search was successful. Would you want to be the director? And I said, mm-mm. I'm a lawyer. I've been doing this too long. I don't want to switch to something else. I said, okay. The day I came back to the office, I'm sitting there in my office, getting myself set up. And he walks in, the president walks in with the provost. And they say, the director of the Weldon Cooper Center has taken a deanship at another institution. We want you to go over there and run it while we do a search. And the Weldon Cooper Center is the research center for the university, particularly focused on working with the Virginia General Assembly. They do research, they do demographics. That's one of their main jobs. So I went over 18 PhDs and their staff, and and I did that for a year. And at the end of the year, they said, John, you want to do this? We think you'd be a good person to stay. And, interesting. Most of the staff, the senior staff, the PhDs, they were kind of like sneered, you're not one of us, you're not a PhD, and you're a president's, So I said, no, this is not something I really want to do. Came back to the president's office, and within 6 months, I got a presidency.
Yeah, so tell me how that opportunity came up at your alma mater, and what it felt like to go back.
No, well, this was in the fall of 1996. Central State's in deep trouble. They fired Art Thomas from the presidency in 95. They hired an interim who apparently was not working out, had done some things that people were kind of pissed off. They were looking for a presidency. One of my classmates was on the board and became the chair. And he was calling me, since he had minimal higher ed experience, he was calling me out at the University of Virginia. And I said, well, I'll be happy to be a resource for you. But here's my resume. Maybe I can get paid for some of this stuff if you want to consult me. He took my resume. Then they kicked off a search, and my resume was thrown in a pile of applications. And over the period of time, my resume began to move higher up. I was invited for an interview. And what happened was the thing that I had advised search committees not to do. I tell search committees, I do searches now, do not fall in love with candidates. Don't fall in love with a candidate. Make sure this is the right, don't fall in love with them. I went to the interview with the board and we fell in love.
I can see why.
We fell in love. And so that was it.
Now, I know your time has been valuable, and I appreciate you taking it. So the thing I'm really most curious about from your time as the president at Central State University is securing that necessary land grant funding that is such a precious resource for these institutions. Can you speak to the process of trying to secure that funding and what it means for helping the university and keeping the lights on in all of this?
Okay, well, it seemed like there was a cyclical problem with the Ohio General Assembly looking at Central State as an impermanent resource. There's always been talk of closing the institution. As I moved through my presidency, we had a lot of success. We balanced our budget every year. We were doing great things. But the idea was, what can we do to sort of stop this talk about closure and what have you? What happened, I'm going to say around 2008, 2009 or so, Terry Cosby, who was at the time the director of USDA programs for the state of Ohio. I forgot his exact title. He approached the university, approached me about establishing scholarships for students in agriculture, plant, seed, whatever, agriculture. And he said, it's a challenge for us to do this with Central State because you're not a land grant, but we think that there may be opportunities here. And I said, okay, you're right. We're not a land grant. And it sort of began to turn over in my mind. Why are we not a land grant? And I recalled there's a book. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's called The First 100 Years, Central State University, First 100 Years. It's around here someplace. And it's written by an alumnus, and it gives a very detailed history of what happened is that when we tried to get land grant status in 1890. We applied for land grant status. It went through, in order to get land grant, it's a two-stage process. One, the state has to approve you as their 1890 land grant. Once you get a state approval, the next is it gets into the U.S. Farm Bill, and then you become a federally funded 1890 land grant, and then you get federal money that has to be matched with state money. Well, in 1890, we got through, I believe, the Ohio House approved our 1890 status, but then it got snagged in the Senate. Either the Senate or the House, one of the two. It happened because then Ohio State University said they did not want us. There was a sense that any land grant money we would be getting would be split off from Ohio State. They were wrong. What it would mean was that the state of Ohio would also have to support Central State by matching monies that Central State got from the feds. We wouldn't take any money from Ohio State, but they just did not want to have us participate in land grant program. So they lobbied. And at the time, the senator, Rutherford Hayes, formerly president, he was now a U.S. senator, he stepped in and said, okay, guys, this is not going to work. We're not going to have Ohio State. We got to continue to support them. And they essentially said, you guys withdraw your application, and we'll take care of you. And it started becoming a race thing, of course. Mm-hmm. So that's what happened. In around 2009, I began to say, let's revive this. And I talked to some folks and looked at me like, going on a fool's errand. I said, yeah, it's all you can do. We took and wrote a paper and took it to our state senator. And he looked at it and he said, is this right? I said, yeah, this is the history. I gotta have the Attorney General and other folks research this. I said, you go back to the Columbus Dispatch. There are articles in the Dispatch about this, going back to 1890. And about 4 months later, he came back and said, you're absolutely right, this is right. And I said, I know. He said, you look at the largest, most well-funded, most resourced HBCUs are the 1890s.
Yes.
Florida A&M, Tennessee State. Elizabeth City State. Alabama A&M. They're the ones that have, and we missed out for 100 years. We missed out on the opportunity to be a leading HBCU. So working with our state rep, and we were able to get to Ohio. And I was, at that point, I was retiring in 2012. And I think their gift to me was the State General Assembly in 2012 saved one vote naming Central State University the 1890 land grant institution. And the one vote person has since recanted and said, I made a mistake. I should have voted also to support it.
So without your critical eye, your critical legal eye, you really helped save this institution, because it was in a lot of ways a state of disrepair in certain areas. Like what sort of tangible effects did having that land grant status create for the university after that?
Well, when I came in 1996, the university was flat on its back. And if you look at some of the history, you'll see that. But tangible, the university gets $16 million every year in land grant funding. In 2022, they got $42 million of research grants. The land grant faculty went from 0 to about 25. That's just faculty. You look at staff. There is a new multi-million-dollar research facility that's being completed right now on campus. It has completely transformed the university's research mission. It has a powerful research mission that it didn't have before. And this talk of closures is off the table because it's got a federal land grant charter.
Are you able to speak to any impacts it had on the radio station and communications more broadly?
I've not.
And what is as president, you're a busy guy. You're the face of the university. You have a lot going on. But what is your relationship to WCSU at that point? Do you recall listening again?
A couple of things. Turk Logan was, when I came in, he was, you familiar with Turk Logan? John?
Not too much. You're my first interview for this school. So
okay, but
please
Turk
tell me.
Logan was, he was a long-term director of WCSU. I think Turk Logan is still around. John Turk Logan.
Mm-hmm.
Edward, I forgot Edward's last name. He succeeded Turk.
Okay.
A couple of people succeeded, but Ed, I forgot Turk. He died, unfortunately. I donated all of my vinyl to the radio station.
Really?
When I retired.
That's amazing. How big was your collection, would you say? Roughly?
It wasn't that big. Maybe you know. Okay, it was 4 cases, cases of vinyl.
I love that.
You ever hear Frank Foster?
That sounds familiar.
Saxophonist. Frank Foster is a graduate of Central State.
Okay.
He died. Frank Foster died about 10 or 15 years ago, if not longer. His wife gave us one of his alto saxophone. I gave that to the radio station, and it sits right there now in the radio station. Frank Foster.
I have walked through there. I think I recall seeing.
Have you seen it?
We did a preliminary site visit to the station.
Yeah, I gave that when he gave us she gave us a saxophone. I felt there's no better place to put it than in the radio station.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way for me to transition towards legacy. And when you set your mark on an institution like Central State, how do you think about legacy, and what do you want your legacy to be?
They've given it to me already.
Gonna go grab something. Wow, so you just handed me a coaster, a sort of slate coaster here, Central State University, and on it says John W. Garland, College of Engineering, Science, Technology, and Agriculture. To have that name for you, what does that mean to you?
That's my legacy. To have the university recognize my presidency as being so impactful, to name the College of Engineering, Science, Technology, and Agriculture is something that'll be around in perpetuity.
And where does securing something like the land grant status that helps support a college like that, where does that rank amongst your proudest accomplishments, and what else fits into your proudest accomplishments in your life?
Oh boy.
Small question, right?
Yeah. Well, that is one. Clearly that's one, because it cements the institution's research agenda, and it cuts off, I said, discussions about why is there a Central State. I guess for me, the thousands of young men and women that have graduated from the institution. To me, that's during my 15-year tenure, to see these. What's most remarkable about HBCUs and Central State in particular is how we actually transform people, actually change people. It's almost like seeing a caterpillar change into a butterfly. I'm serious. I recall seeing young men and women come into the institution, freshmen, with do-rags on their head, their pants down below their waist. And in 4 years, have on a suit and tie and ready to take on the world. Having a woman in her, who came in dressed inappropriately in a business suit, ready to take on the world. People, different people. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And you won't see that very often. You won't see somebody go from one thing to another thing. I spent years, as I said, at institutions where you see smart people come in and smart people graduate. Have they been transformed? I've actually seen people being transformed. And so I guess, to me, if there's anything, any legacy is the fact that there are thousands of young women and men who were transformed during my tenure. Was I responsible for it? My responsibility was I was there to keep the doors open, the lights on, the faculty working and supported, the budget balanced, and everyone feeling that we were sort of rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, and that's the impression I get. We three of our staff on this project, right? Jocelyn Robinson and Phyllis Jeffers Coley and Amy Harper. They've worked under your leadership at the institution. So, how do you think about your manager style, your style of leadership?
I roll up my sleeves. I mean, there's a term in the military about a leader who will carry their own bags. There are some people who say, okay, I'm in charge of everybody. I'll carry my own bags. I believe So my leadership style, I think, and people could tell me otherwise, is I'll get in the trenches with you. I'll work with you in the trenches. I will hold you accountable as I expect to be held accountable. But my job is to give you everything you need to succeed. If you need, whatever you need to succeed, you let me know and I will do my best to give you those resources. I will also give you all the opportunities. I will make sure there are resources for you to go get additional training. And I'll be a confidant. A confidant, I should say.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, just a few more here. And, tell me, I want to learn a little bit more about your wife, Carolyn, and the work she does. I think she works for the Kettering Foundation or has?
Well, she's retired now.
Okay.
As I said, we met at Central State. We've been together now over 50 years.
Congrats.
Yeah. In fact, she has a master's degree from Antioch University. And during the time she's worked for, most of her work has been with nonprofit NGOs, so to speak. She worked for the Sisters of Mercy for a number of years. And while we were in Ohio, she worked for the Kettering Foundation as a senior program officer. But she retired in 2014.
Any children?
Two children. Amy. Amy's my daughter. She's in New York. She has a son.
Named for your mother.
Exactly right. Who is Amy's an old family name. As I did research, Amy goes back about 5 generations of my family. The name Amy, but we named her after my mother. Her middle name is my wife's mother's name, Amy Lillian. Her and her husband live in New York. They have a little boy. He's 10. His name is Asa. They live in Brooklyn. 15, 20 minutes away is her brother, my son, Jabari. He and his wife live in Brooklyn. They have 2 children. Cole is 12. And Ellis. Cole his middle name is an old family name, Elias. His name is Cole Elias. My son did not know the name of Elias, that he has a great granduncle named Elias. So this may be a good place to ask, what gives your life meaning today? My family. As you get older and you've sort of worked and retired, family becomes most important, which is the reason why my wife and I decided that even at this sort of more senior stage in our life, to go down back to Charleston, back to James Island, and build a house. We know that's not some place where we're going to be at for who knows how long, but it's a place for us to provide a legacy for our children and grandchildren moving forward.
And then, my last real question here, is we have the pleasure on the HBCU Radio Preservation Project of having you on our board of advisors, among others. And I want to know what that means to you to be a part of this operation in that sense, and just why is this work so important that we're preserving the history of HBCU radio?
When I was approached about this, I mean, I could not say no, because HBCU radio is like a spider web that goes across the nation, that connects our institutions, but more importantly, our communities. And to the extent that we can sort of deepen that web and to make sure that we understand that HBCU radio is a entity or entities. If I could be assistant, I look forward to doing that. Yeah, but I just think it's just so important that we understand we're not an island, but we're a sea connected by undersea, oversea, connected by cables. And the work that you're doing is just so important. I mean, if you got, are there stations considering selling their licenses?
I have to imagine so, given that it's happened before. So it's important that we keep this.
Yeah, I mean, if you need somebody to come take off their shoes and pound the table, I'll be happy to do that. But it's a mistake to sell a license. They are the value in them is not the money, but the ability to reach out and touch people.
I love that. Is there anything that we have not discussed today you want to make sure you get on record here? No. I think I've talked for quite a bit of time, and thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. Yes, sir. I'm so appreciative of this. Thank you very much for speaking with me today.